This is Nathaniel Gavronsky, and I want to talk to you about a very controversial bill that just passed the legislature in the state of Iowa during the General Assembly for 2021. It has passed both the full Senate and the full House. It is now on its way to the governor's desk for final signature, becoming law. Now, many of you know this bill as the election reform bill and the election integrity laws. In its final form, it was Senate File 413 and House File 590. Its author was Bobby Kaufman, the representative on the state house from Cedar County. Now, this bill was controversial mostly because there's a lot of false accusations made about the bill and fake news in general about the intent. Now, I want to go over a couple of those issues and, to make sure people understand the truth behind what happened here. A good part of this bill is reactionary towards the unethical actions taken by several county auditors preceding the 2020 election. These actions by these auditors were so egregious that the state had to take legal action against them, and this is to ensure that those behaviors do not happen again. Now, for the other auditors, it is very unfortunate that a few bad apples had to spoil it for everyone else. And one of the biggest concerns the auditors had was the time for the U.S. postal system to complete some of these actions. And to be honest, that is a valid concern. However, this seems to be a problem for the U.S. Postal Service. And maybe it's time we need to address some of those Postal Service issues with the federal level delegates for the state of Iowa: Cindy Axney, Randy Feenstra, Ashley Henson, and Mariette Miller-Meeks, along with Senator Joni Ernst and Chuck Grassley. These are your federal delegation members to the federal government, and they are the ones who would be tackling issues involving the post office and times for the post office handling mail and packaging. So I want to go into the very next aspect of this bill, which was that in case of an emergency, a derecho, a public health emergency, that people weren't going to be able to vote, people weren't going to be able to make absentee ballots, houses were going to be gone, there'd be all kinds of problems, people wouldn't be able to do it. Well, they thought about this in the bill, and this is an original copy of the bill. Anyone can get these. They're online. And anyone who wants to get a copy of it can actually download it as a PDF or a Word file and then print it. And they also give them free of charge at the state capitol if you would ever want to go and review the original language for any of these bills and escape the hype and just actually find out what's actually being said. You're more than welcome to do so. And I encourage everyone to do that. And the author of, it tells you the file number, the committee, and you can actually look up all the information, again, from the website to the original author. Okay, so all that stuff is on there. Now, when it comes to emergencies, on the House version of the bill, which is House File 590, page 15, at the very bottom on line 34, it starts off with this: the commissioner, which in this case means the county auditor, shall not send an absentee ballot application to a voter. In the event of a public health disaster declared by the governor pursuant to section 29C.6, the General Assembly may, by resolution, direct the state commissioner to send an absentee ballot application to each registered voter prior to a primary or general election held in an even number year. If the General Assembly is not in session, the Legislative Council, which is a group of legislators, leadership from both parties, from both chambers, will meet, and the Legislative Council may so direct the state commissioner by a majority vote. Which means in a derecho, a COVID-19 situation, so close to an election, or there's question about being able to get out at all to make these applications for people who don't have access to the internet, so on and so forth, or there's no internet because of power outages. There's a variety of situations, but once the governor makes a declaration that all counties affected would be able to get, like just what we did for 2020, send out an automatic absentee ballot form. Okay. The next one, the big one, had to do with people not being able, again, with the emergency, say that the deadline to request an absentee ballot has passed, and that you got into a car accident or because of health reasons, you had to move to an assisted living facility. They addressed that as well, and they addressed it on page 25 of 36 on line 12 of the House File 590 version of the bill. And so line 12, page 25. If a registered voter becomes a patient, tenant, or a resident of a hospital, assisted living program, or health care facility outside the county where the voter is registered, and again also within the county itself, after the deadline to make a written application for an absentee ballot as provided by section 53.2, and this is even on election day, by the way, even on election day, which to my knowledge wasn't available prior to this law. The voter may designate a person to deliver and return the absentee ballot. Now, the designee I will go into in just a little bit, and within section 53.33, and I'll talk to you about who the designee is. But the designee, up to 4 hours prior to the polls closing, which the new poll closure is at 8 p.m., so 4 p.m., 1600 hours, on the day of the election, an individual due to medical emergency who had become hospitalized and had the state was admitted into the hospital for things out of their control, or had recently become a new resident at an assisted living facility. They have a section here that directs how to deal with them and how to make sure that those individuals are able to vote. And the next one is, well, people who, you're not allowing anyone to help anyone else. So if someone's disabled, they're not going to be able to find, they might not have anyone to deliver a ballot. Not everyone has a car. Not everyone has access to all, the list goes on and on and on. Okay. All of that is fake news, because it is very clear that you are allowed to have people assist you in the delivery and return of your absentee ballot to the county commissioner for the elections, the county auditor's office, and how to ensure that this is done properly. They lay it out very, very clearly. Now, some of the critiques about this, and I heard it in debate tonight, was that disabled people aren't going to be able to have anyone to do this. You're going to have, there are independent living elderly people who really can't drive and have to rely on someone else to help them and care for them. They're not going to be able to do it. They're not going to have anyone to help take care of them. It's absolutely falsehoods. Here's what it says. This is page 27 of 36. Line 9 is where it starts on the House File 590. Section 52, new section 53.33. Unlawful return of ballot. Okay, notwithstanding any provision of the law to the contrary, which means if it says you can't do it somewhere else in the code, then you can do it. And they are going to be addressing some of the old code in regards to caretakers on future legislation, which was already planned before this. So they're going to be making sure that it's a lot more inclusive once that bill comes up. So here's the thing. Notwithstanding any provisions of the law to the contrary, no person other than the registered voter or an individual who lives in the same household as a registered voter. Now listen, it doesn't say the person living with that person needs to be a spouse or even related. This is someone who lives in the same household. It doesn't require a blood relation or a marriage certificate. It doesn't require anything other than they have the same address. Comma. The registered voter's immediate family member. Now, this person is an immediate family member. Mother, father, sister, brother, son, daughter. The immediate family member. And it doesn't specify that immediate family member must reside in the same household. So again, we have someone who you're not related to, who lives in the same household to you, can deliver it. And someone who doesn't live with you, who as an immediate family member can assist you when returning your completed absentee ballot to the county auditor's office. And it says comment that an individual serving as a caretaker for the registered voter. Now, a caretaker was the only thing that people were trying to, well, it's not defined very well because it doesn't relate a specific code, what the state definition of a caretaker is in this bill. And communicating with several legal scholars, someone who was, this is the proclaimed scholars on Iowa constitutional law, that, and this is the understanding of the author of the bill as well, that someone who is a proclaimed caretaker on a regular basis, it would be covered under this, and they are going to review the code on this and the annotation to because our code is actually mostly from the 1970s, and they will probably actually codify this in a more secure secure and codified manner in future legislation, because they want to make sure they have it. But they are looking at expanding the definition of caretaker for those that were worried that they weren't going to be able to find someone who's going to be able to do this. So, and the author of the bill, in closing arguments, mentions this specifically with one of the opponents, and one of the concerns about the definition of a caretaker. So, another person is, or an individual pursuant to section 532 shall collect and complete ballots and return the ballot by mail or in person, so they can mail it in for the individual. They can deliver it in person to the county auditor's office, or select offsite locations like drop boxes, which are still to be permitted in most cases. Now, so they're going to allow the non-Pacific registered voter to return the ballots, and in a majority of situations to where there's a relationship, there's trust, and the registered voter knows the designated absentee ballot returnee. So nowhere in this bill, in the 36 pages, does it mention voter suppression. It doesn't say that a disabled person can't vote, or that a disabled person can't request absentee ballot request form. It's not saying that a person who's disabled can't register. It's not saying that a black person can't register, or that a black person cannot apply for an absentee ballot. It's not saying that a Hispanic person or a person who's not white, it doesn't say anywhere that that person cannot request an absentee ballot. It's not saying that that person is prohibited from having anyone return the ballot other than themselves. As it very clearly states, a family member, a roommate would be able to deliver the ballot legally. So I don't see where the voter suppression is on this bill, because there isn't any. When questioning that Iowa is targeting, this was actually brought up specifically by members of the Democratic Party in the House, that Iowa's Republican legislatures were targeting specifically for the purposes of restricting the vote of blacks, Hispanics, and other minorities. It was pointed out that there are other places that are majority minority electorate, like places like DC and other like Democratic strongholds like Massachusetts, Connecticut, Vermont. A lot of these places actually, even after this bill is made into law, have a shorter time span or no permissible time at all for absentee ballots. So it wouldn't matter what color of skin you were. You couldn't do an absentee ballot if you wanted to. If you could, it's a much shorter time period. I was actually quite middle of the road for this, and the author of the bill does actually go into the list of states and the time periods in which these states and jurisdictions permit absentee ballots. So there is no voter suppression here. There isn't. None. This doesn't lay out a situation where someone wasn't able to vote. And when it comes to the county auditors, it's specifically just protecting the good county auditors from those who wish to do things that could potentially put in jeopardy the sanctity of the vote. It could potentially cost someone their ballot. And you can't send out a lie, but you can't send out pre-filled out information. That happened in multiple states. You can't send out information that's pre-filled out. All it requires is a signature. You have the registered voter, other than the statement of the date of the election and general or primary. All other information must be filled out by the registered voter. When it goes into the voter rolls and the maintenance of the voter rolls, federal law dictates that states on a periodical basis purge inactive voter rolls. This is something that many states have not done properly and has got them into significant trouble. The state of Iowa is ensuring that they are ahead of the curve and make sure that their voter rolls are constantly updated, current, and correct. And for example, when I went to go register in my new county, because I have had to move around a lot, there was a problem because I had registered to vote in a different county several years ago, and there were 2 voter registrations for me. Actually, there were 3. One in Johnson County, one in Davis County, and when I applied to in Wayne County. So there was a problem with being able to make sure that I could vote properly. And by having all those accounts, it was problematic for me to be able to register to vote. And so by creating a provision here that old voter registrations that are inactive are purged, so this wouldn't be a problem. It actually took me a couple of days to get that figured out. So if it would have been closer to the election, I might not have been able to vote in that election, and I would have been very upset. So there's a good purpose for what they're doing here. Now, there were a lot of people who came and spoke out against this, but there were just as many people who spoke for this. And it's true that not everyone got the chance to come to the Capitol in Des Moines. Don't forget that a good chunk of the state of Iowa is more than an hour and a half from the state capitol. The hearing didn't start until 5, and by the time someone got off work in, say, Clinton or Bloomfield or Orange City, they weren't going to be able to make it to this hearing in time. And a lot of people are able to get information to their respective legislatures, legislative representatives in the House and the Senate much easier than they are with these massive committees. And if the Democrats if they really believed that and it had so many people speak out and want to speak out against this, they could have easily had one of their senators sit down there and read off the names of people who were against it, because this was a House bill and the House committee that was in the hearing. So there were options. They didn't do it. This is not a suppression bill. It doesn't suppress anyone's vote. It encourages people to vote in a more timely manner. It secures any auditor from acting in a manner that's not ethical for their office. And it says that if someone makes a mistake, that they could be charged. That there could be some penalties. It doesn't necessarily say that they're going to be convicted or that they're going. It's a guaranteed minimum. If you make a mistake or something goes by a general mistake, that you're going to be thrown in prison. It gives the state and the law enforcement officers the ability to do so, but it doesn't say it is going to happen if an auditor makes a mistake. We're all human. But purposeful attempts to do things that are unethical should be punished immediately, and that's what this bill sets out to do for the auditors. Again, we got to deal with the post office when it comes time for being able to get the information, to get packages and letters through the postal service in time. Contact your federal representation: Joni Ernst, Chuck Grassley, Cindy Axney, Marionette Miller Meeks, Ashley Henson, and Andy Feenstra. They'd be more than happy, I'm sure, to hear your complaints about the U.S. postal system. I know I have my complaints on a variety of things. So with that, I'm going to leave you. I'm going to attach the video file of the author giving his closing remarks before the final vote. And then I have the House final vote, which is lit up on the voter board, so you can see who decided to vote for who. And the Senate has already passed it. It's going to the governor's office for signature. It will be signed. This will be law of the state of Iowa. It's done. Thank you, everyone, for your time. I'm Nathaniel Gavronsky. I encourage everyone and all people to participate in not only state government, but your local county government, your local school boards, city councils. There's a lot of things going on in city council and school board meetings that have a direct impact on your pocketbook. have a direct impact on many things that involve you and your family, especially your children. I would encourage more participation and engagement. Most things that impact you are not done at the state or federal level. It's all done at local, city, county, governments, and school boards, hospital boards. It really is the 99% of your daily life are run by those people in the counties that you reside in. So thank you, everyone. Hope you learned some things from this. If you have any questions or want to be able to access any of the bills at the State House or have questions about any bills that are filed, I will be more than happy to put you in touch with the author of those bills and put you in contact with the committee members that the bills are being considered under. Next week is second funnel, which means bills have to make it past a certain point to be considered. So lots of subs and lots of committee meetings next week. It should be entertaining, should be fun. Thank you, everyone. Please stay healthy, stay wealthy, stay wise, and as always, stay classy, Iowa.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. While I appreciated a robust debate, and I'll always appreciate a robust debate, I literally ran out of ink in one of the 2 pens that I have, writing down what I would characterize, in my opinion, as false characterizations of what's in this bill. I do owe my colleagues on the other side of the aisle an apology, because I heard time and time again in dozens of prepared remarks that this bill was derived from fraud. Fraud, fraud, fraud. So I apologize for ruining your prepared remarks by emphatically stating at the beginning of this debate, in the first sentence that I came out of my mouth, that this bill has nothing to do with fraud. I heard my name mentioned a lot tonight. Not one of you asked me to yield. I'd speculate why, but I'd probably break John Wilson's record for most times being point of order simultaneously. So I'll just state that in my opinion, I think you wouldn't have appreciated the Mack truck-sized holes, Representative Masher, that I would have blown in all of your arguments. So I'm going to repay that favor right now. Representative Conforst and Bohannon, you both stated, in my interpretation of your words, that sure count is disenfranchisement. So I'd like to read the states controlled by Democrats who have sure count: Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New Mexico, Oregon, Rhode Island, and Vermont. I would surmise that none of you would make the accusation that any of those states are having mass voter disenfranchisement, the same way that Iowa is going to have zero voter disenfranchisement from sure count. Representative Bohannon, in my opinion, you mocked my business model, saying that a business would want to have a big flashing light that said open 24 hours. Agreed, because my bill says open 493 hours for voting. Representative Hansen, you had an exchange where you had Representative Masher talk about the number of comments for, the number of comments against. I heard that multiple times. Each one of those comments matters, and each one of those people are very important. But what each one of you that mentioned that failed to acknowledge is that we in the Republican caucus, and I assume most of you in the Democratic caucus, have another barometer to signal public support. And that is when we go back home and talk to people in the gas stations, at the grocery stores, and at the hardware stores, there is no disputing. There are tens of thousands of Iowans that tell this Republican caucus every single week when we go home, we emphatically support this bill, we want this bill, we think this bill is necessary, and we support it. So that number of 1,000 and some versus 17, it's emphatically false. Representative Wilbur, you stated that Iowans trust our voting system. Thank you. I agree. Because that voting system includes the very pieces of legislation that I heard many people in this chamber, in my opinion, characterize as almost apocalyptic. That system you say voters trust that I agree on includes voter ID. That system includes voter ID for absentee ballots. And that system includes taking the number of days to vote from 40 to 29. So I agree that Iowans support our voting system, which include good Republican pieces of legislation like this before you tonight. Representative Hunter, I was extra disappointed you didn't ask me to yield. You said that Iowa, at one point, I don't want to preface with a certain year or a certain group, but I heard you say that Iowa was number 2 in voter integrity in a survey that you had seen. I don't dispute that. Do you know who was number 1 at that same time in that same survey? The home state of Vermont of Bernie Sanders, the home state of Bernie Sanders, Vermont, who also has the sure count. One of those things that I heard you specifically say was going to lead to mass voter disenfranchisement. I highly doubt Bernie Sanders' home state is a home of mass voter disenfranchisement. Representative Masher, you highlighted a story about your neighbor and about how she became injured and had to go into the hospital. I'd like to read, and I'm reading off of the House version, page 24, section 49, in code section 53.22, subsection 3. Current code. Any registered voter who becomes a patient, tenant, or resident of a hospital, assisted living program, or health facility in the county where the voter is registered to vote, new code section, new language, after the deadline to make a written application for an absentee ballot as provided in section 53.2 on an election day may request an absentee ballot during that period on or an election day. Shame on you for saying I'm cruel. Know your code. Representative Steckman, you said that you characterized auditors as revamping election law. And you just couldn't believe we want to take away home rule. Well, I would ask you to read Article 3 of the Constitution of the State of Iowa that states in Section 38A, municipal home rule. Municipal corporations are granted home rule power and authority not inconsistent with the laws of the General Assembly. You don't get to get creative with our Constitution. Representative Hunter, 4 times I heard you, in my opinion, speak glowingly of Paul Payton. I'm happy to hear of your newfound admiration for our Secretary of State. Representative Wolf, I believe we have a genuine legal disagreement. I'm certainly not a lawyer. You are, in my opinion, a very intelligent lawyer, and you have your opinion on what caretaker means. You believe that because other sections of the code, irrelevant to this bill, define caretaker as something else, that a judge would go down a witch hunt to find those and assume the legislature was purposely prescriptive to that relevant code section without naming it. That makes no sense to me. We were intentionally not prescriptive, and I believe the word caretaker, without having those forbidden prescriptions, could be interpreted broadly. You're a very intelligent lawyer. I have other very intelligent lawyers that disagree. If I can be shown empirical evidence, I want to make sure that section is right, and in the technical bill, I will make sure that we fix that if it's not accurate as other lawyers believe it is right now. Representative Bohannon, it's the second time I've heard you repeat that Iowa has amongst the shortest voting times under this legislation. That's just dead wrong. It's not even close. We're in the middle of the pack. Get your facts right. Representative Jurdy, I appreciated being on your episode of Mythbusters. I would surmise that we inspired very low listenership. Well, let's go down your path of myth-busting. You said, who's for the bill, who's opposed to the bill, and you acted so emphatic that you knew the final count because you knew who was at that public hearing. But you didn't take into account the thousands upon thousands of Iowans who do support this. You used the wrong barometer. Myth busted. You said that it doesn't shorten the it doesn't shorten the campaign season at all. Because if you vote absentee, you're off the call list. You're off the door knock list. That's right. They don't censor your TV. They don't censor your radio. There's still commercials. There's still television commercials. And we all know, when do we spend our money on election season? Is it in June? Of course not. It's when voting takes place. So this will decrease the veracity of election. Myth busted. And then finally, you said that under this legislation, in my opinion of how you spoke on these words, that we would have suppressed 6,500 ballots. Well, in my opinion, I interpret that as Iowans aren't smart enough to figure out how to vote. I think they are. Myth busted. Worst episode of Mythbusters ever. In closing, Representative Winkler, you spoke about public perception matters. I totally agree. I want to give credit to the television outlet that is here. They tried very hard to get me to come on before this debate. I didn't have time, but they tried to present both sides of it. I can't say the same for our newspaper prints across the state. I think one thing all 100 of us can agree on, I'm not shy when it comes to the media, right? Yeah, I got myself. That was a joke. Ha ha. Thanks, Bob. But when I read the stories characterizing the content of this bill, I noticed that one thing was missing. Any sort of input from the floor manager. Not one newspaper, aside from the Daily Iowa, who did a very good job. The Iowa City Press Citizen, the Quad City Times, Cedar Rapids Gazette, Des Moines Register, and any other newspaper that I saw. Do you know how many of them made one phone call to me asking for the Republican viewpoint? 0. What I read doesn't belong on the front page of the paper. Their characterizations were opinion pieces that belong either in the opinion section or in a tabloid. Shame on all of you for misleading the public, in my opinion. It is really easy to vote absentee and early before this legislation. It's going to remain really easy to vote after this legislation is signed into law. This vote protects Iowans' right to vote, and it adds certainty and security to it. This bill does not suppress one single vote. Repetition does not create reality. Let me say that again. Repetition does not create reality. You don't get to say something so many times that it just magically becomes the case. This bill allows for 493 hours of early voting time for Iowans. That's 3 weeks. It does not pass any common sense test to say that you cannot vote in 493 hours. And in closing, I just want to acknowledge the states that have less early voting time than what we're offering in this bill. And I'm going to venture that not a single one of you is going to say there's mass voter suppression in these states. Colorado, 15 days. Connecticut does not have early in-person voting. It doesn't exist in Connecticut. Delaware does not have in-person voting. They don't even have no excuse voting. Absentee voting. And I think we all know whose home state that is. District of Columbia, a board does set it, but no more than 10 days before the election. Maryland, the second Monday before the election. Massachusetts, 11 days before the election. I read all these states because they're all Democrat states. They all have far less than we do. So I stand here before you to say that your water holds about as much, your argument holds about as much water as a strainer. This is a good bill. This does not suppress a single vote. Mr. Speaker, I move Senate File 413.
The gentleman from Cedar moves the bill read for the last time and placed on its passage with objections. Hearing none, clerk will read.
Senate File 413, a bill for enablers to conduct elections, including absentee ballot and voter list maintenance activities, maintenance as applicable, including verification of applicable conditions being enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Iowa.
Question no shall vote pass. All those pass will aye. All vote no, clerk will show proceed to vote. Jones votes aye. Have you all now voted? Clerk will the sheet now pay attention to results of the vote. Those voting aye 57, no 37, absent or not voting 6. The bill receiving council's majority is declared to pass the House. Their objection to the title, chair hears none, the title is agreed to. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Harrison, Representative Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask